The woman on a Tulsa street corner was startled. A freckle-faced boy looked at her, pleading, and said, "Help me, my name is David Gosh." Suddenly, two men raced up, pinned his arms behind him, and dragged him away. Months later, the lady saw the little boy's face again on a television special about missing children. The child on that Tulsa street corner was Johnny Gosh, kidnapped from a West Des Moines, Iowa neighborhood while delivering papers September 5, 1982. Just a little later, you're going to be hearing from the mother of little Johnny Gosh. Estimates vary widely about the number of other Johnnies who have been kidnapped. The FBI lists 36,000 in its computer, and some estimate that as many as 1.5 million children are missing. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children says the most common forms of abduction involve offering a ride, the promise of a gift, an invitation to a party, and impersonating a police officer. According to one noted study centering on 2 American cities, 83% of the children kidnapped in Jacksonville and 96% of those abducted in Houston were sexually assaulted. Law enforcement experts claim tens of thousands of missing children are used in pornography. Parents, education officials, and the police are responding with preventive measures, including fingerprinting, photographs, videotapes, and educational lectures. Some dentists offer to implant coded microdots in children's teeth. Proponents say these efforts are harmless and often useful. Opponents argue a mass hysteria regarding missing children has been generated to unnecessarily frighten parents. The trauma of having a child disappear is excruciating. The parents of Johnny Gosh put it this way, quote, "After 4 years of searching for our kidnapped son, the worry, pain, and agony have not diminished. As long as we have people committing this type of crime against children, we have a great deal of work to accomplish to assure the safety of generations to come," end of quote. 10% of all missing children are discovered murdered, according to one study, many after having been brutally assaulted. What's wrong with a country that can trace missing automobiles, refrigerators, and TV sets, but can't find its own offspring? Just a moment ago, I recounted the story of little John David Gosh. A tragic story. One that has been highlighted in the national press, but one that still remains unsolved. And Noreen Gosh is on the line with me back in Des Moines, Iowa. Noreen, I thank you for joining with us today. Do you count the days, the weeks, the months that little Johnny's been gone?
Yes, it never leaves our mind because we have the constant reminders at home, his empty room, many of his belongings, some of the things that he prized, just the type of young man that he was at the time that he was, with us, which was a short time. Now that we look back on it, 12 years isn't very long.
Have you left his belongings in place, kind of kept things as they were, and what has that done to you psychologically? Do you feel it's good or bad?
What we did in the beginning was to more or less research any cases where a child had been returned and how the child reacted if there had been a disturbance among their belongings. And we decided to leave some of Johnny's special things that he liked in his room in the event that he's ever found. Sometimes, from what I've been told, children that return, if they think that life just went on without them too easily, it sets them back in their progress of recovery and adaptation again. So this is why we've left his room and some of his special things as is. And yes, it's hard, but I don't know that it would be any less difficult if the items were not there. It's just always going to be with us because he's not.
Of course, there's a national debate. It has raged across the country in recent years, some suggesting that hysteria is being caused by parents who blow things out of proportion, who make the whole phenomenon much worse than it is, that it's really not all that bad. How do you stand in this debate?
Well, I think anyone that makes a statement like that it really isn't as bad as it appears to be, ought to have their kid kidnapped. And then we'll see what they say. My son was minding his own business, delivering newspapers, and some perverted individual came into our neighborhood and took him. And then 2 years later, there was a second kidnapping in the same city of another newspaper carrier. And anyone that thinks that is just blowing something out of proportion ought to put their kid out on the street corner to be taken next. And we'll see. And I know that sounds like a pretty radical statement, but I think anytime we have a sick society in which children cannot even walk 1 block from their home in a nice, quiet neighborhood, there's definitely a problem in the country.
How do you feel when you walk by a newsstand and you see rows of magazines, pornographic magazines, some of them depicting children in Lolita-style fashion and with sexual overtones, and you look at that and you wonder if the person who took Johnny might have been reading one of those magazines.
I feel that we need to have much stricter sanctions on this type of material and limits, due to the fact that an average citizen who is all there, has all their marbles, might be able to look at that kind of material and not be affected to commit a crime. But you take someone that is hanging on the edge of emotional insecurity and instability, they will then act upon what they see. And studies have shown that severe violence, films depicting sexual violence, there are copycat crimes that occur many times. And I attended a Senate hearing in which I testified, and evidence to that effect was given at the hearing, that there is reason to substantiate this. And I think that that just promotes the problem. It just creates a bigger problem.
Are you familiar with the movie? It's one of the top movies in the country right now, Raising Arizona.
No, I have not seen that yet.
Have you heard about it?
Very little.
Well, it's a film about a man who has more babies than he really needs, and an ex-con who marries a cop and kidnaps the baby because she wants to have the child. And it's a rollicking, humorous comedy that's packing theaters across the country. I consider it reprehensible, and I find it rather disgusting that anybody would seek to make light of what is such a horrible sense of grief and pain to someone like you. Does our society take missing children seriously? What do you think is the attitude of the public at large?
There's a lot of concern and compassion by many people in the public, but unfortunately, I think the majority seems to think that, it'll never happen to them, that some of us parents that have squawked because we couldn't get the proper kind of law enforcement action and a lot of other backups, that we just were out of line because we, in fact, contested the system. I mean, we demanded answers. Well, films like this, I will make a point to go and see it now. I had not heard that much about it. But I'd like to know who the producer is of this and just what kind of a problem he has concerning his attitudes.
What, as a parent, would you not do again? What are some of the measures you would take if you had it to do all over again? Some of the things that you would look out for that might be of help to parents who are listening.
Okay. Johnny was taught not to talk to strangers, and in fact did not go close to the vehicle the morning of the kidnapping. And he was warned about all these things. My husband was generally always with him on the paper route. That one particular Sunday morning was only one of 3 that my husband wasn't with him. We later found out that there had been someone in the neighborhood watching the house, and the license number was given to the police, but unfortunately they were not able to track anything down. And Johnny was being observed. This kidnapping was of a more organized nature. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing. If we would have known about that car in advance, there's no way that Johnny would have been alone in that route. If we would have known that there had been other abduction attempts in the neighborhood prior that summer, none of the children probably would have been out playing in their own yard after dark. But you see, none of it was publicized. It was kept quiet by the law enforcement here, even though there had been other abduction attempts. I believe that when there is something like this that occurs, there is a benefit in reporting this through the media so that parents can be a little bit more cautious and counsel their children even further. We do quite a number of safety awareness programs. We developed a program that's called In Defense of Children, in which we teach the children and their parents what to watch for in the criminal, what type of approaches they will make to a child. Most parents don't know where to begin to tell their children to be careful of a stranger.
Do you expect Johnny to come back, or is it unrealistic to hold out a false hope that puts your life on hold? What do the psychologists and the counselors who are advising you say? To go forward or to still continue to have hope?
We approach all of this with cautious optimism. The fact that he has not been found, nor a body or any remains, means that he possibly could still be alive. And we will continue to at least hope that someday he'll be returned. He may not, and we're prepared for that too.
Well, Noreen,
we try to be very realistic.
Noreen, we have something in this program known as America's Largest Live Prayer Family, and we certainly will ask people all across America to pray for the return of your child and the return of other children. We're not going to mention where this caller is from for some obvious reasons. The name is Bubba. Bubba, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Bob. I've been listening, and I am someone who has abducted a child a couple of years ago. I don't need to tell exactly when.
That's all right.
And I spent 18 months in prison. And well, I feel that I've paid my price to the people of where I'm from. And I feel terrible.
Was the child returned?
Yes.
Boy or girl?
Little boy.
Why did you do it?
Well, my wife and I had a big fight, and well, I got mad and threw her and my other child out, and I was in a state of confusion. I didn't know how I could help myself, and I didn't want to help myself, and I went and used some alcoholic beverages and got a little tipsy. And I was driving around thinking of what I could do. And, well, there was a boy on his bicycle, and he was doing a paper route. And I grabbed him. And I went to the mountains. And, you know, since then I just haven't been able to feel right about myself. It hurts when I think about it.
Did you harm the child in any way?
Not sexually. I did beat him up pretty bad. I bruised his face.
How old was he?
Oh, maybe 14.
How are you finally detected?
I turned myself in. I took him to the authorities, and that was taken in on my trial.
So that's one of the reasons you got off so easily, was because you did turn yourself in? Because this is a serious crime generally. I mean, it can be a capital crime.
Well, Bob, I served an 18-month term in prison. And during my time in prison, I experienced different realms of trying to forget it and blaming my wife and blaming God and blaming different people for what I had done. I had turned to drugs in the prison, and then all sorts of different things that are cruel to just mankind in general. And since then, I have gotten out, and I have given my soul to God, and I'm involved in the little brother program here where I am.
Now, there's some people who might say that's the worst thing that you could do because you're too close in proximity to other children. How do we know you're not going to do it again?
Well, it has to do with my wife, and I just didn't want her. I don't want to lose her, and she still hasn't come back to me.
And what about your child, boy or girl?
A little girl.
Does she know about this? Is she old enough to understand it?
Well, she's getting to the age where she'll find out, and I'm trying to see if I could work with other children to help her in her own way. It's a frustrating process, as I'm sure you could understand. And
what have the psychiatrists and psychologists, who I'm sure you must have had conferences with, did they say there was anything in your past, anything that caused you to commit this kind of an act?
I was a sexually abused child.
Mm-hmm. When you took the child back,
yeah,
did you ever face the parents?
I saw his mother.
In court?
Well, there too. But
what
at
was
the
it,
police station.
Bubba, what was it like looking into the face of this mother whose child you had taken and at least physically abused?
It was hard. I don't know if I could put it into words. I felt, it was terrible. It was the worst feeling anyone has ever felt, and I know I'm not perfect, and I know I have problems, but I know I can be saved through my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Well, I tell you, Bubba, the hope of God in your life is the bottom line in a situation like this, because outside of that, the act is so reprehensible and so heinous that I would think its imprint on your consciousness would be so torturous and severe it'd be difficult to ever escape it without God's grace.
Well, I'm still having a hard time forgiving myself, and
Has God forgiven you?
I don't know.
You don't
Mr.
know?
Larson. Sometimes I think yes, and other times I think no.
What does the Bible say, Bubba?
Well, it says that I can be saved, but I have to do a few things first.
Yeah. But it says, as far as the east is from the west, he has removed our transgressions from us.
Well, where does it say that? I haven't read it. I just don't know.
Well, it says that in Psalm 103, verses 11 and 12.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Bubba, have you ever had a chance to talk with the parents to make any type of restitution or express yourself in any way to them?
No, I was told the restraining order was put out, so I couldn't.
Have you ever thought of writing them a letter?
Well, yes, but I don't want to create waves, and I have to look at it. Well, my psychiatrist told me not to because of they didn't want, they figured I had paid my debt to society, and that they told me just to go on and not worry about it anymore. And
I'm not sure I agree with that advice, and I don't want to step in and give some quick passing judgment here, but I should think it could be some kind of comfort to those parents if you were to express yourself, even in a letter, how sorry you are, and so they had something tangible in their hands to at least indicate to them there is some repentance and regret on your part.
Well, there is. I don't even know how I would get a hold of him.
Okay. Bubba?
Yeah.
I want you to listen to me very carefully.
All right.
I'm reading from the Word of God. God has not dealt with us according to our sin, and He hasn't rewarded us according to our iniquity. Bubba, if God dealt with all of us on the basis of what we've done, none of us would be alive. None of us could stand in God's presence because we've all sinned and we've all committed terrible things. So the Word of God says in Psalm 103, God doesn't deal with that, but it goes on to say, as the heaven is high above the earth, so great is His mercy toward them that fear Him. As far as the east is from the west, so far He removed our transgressions from us.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a father pities his children, so the Lord pities them that fear Him.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line, Bubba, if you fear God, if you really fear God, and if you're sorry, the sin is gone, it's wiped away, it's washed away. In God's mind, it doesn't exist.
Well, I know that, and right now I'm getting involved in a religion and in a church that has been helpful in my problem, and they have really been good to me.
May I pray with you?
Please do.
Bubba, how old are you?
22.
22. Father in heaven, I reach out to this young man. I know we've all sinned. Romans 1 tells us the wrath of God is revealed against all ungodliness. We've all fallen short. I thank you, Lord, that in spite of the terrible deed he committed, you reached down by your mercy. That, dear God, sustain him, restore him, heal him, so that he can bring hope to others. This is the kind of crime, God, that in the natural it causes us to feel repugnant. But I just pray, God, that Bubba may know your forgiveness and the forgiveness of others as he repents and turns from his way. Amen. Melody Gibson works with an organization called Operation Lookout in Seattle, Washington. Did you have a chance to hear Bubba a few moments ago?
Yes, I did.
What's your reaction when you hear someone like that talk? Have you talked with child abductors? Have you ever conversed directly with these people?
I try to avoid that as much as possible. I don't really much like what happens. Let me share something with you. Are you talking about the young man who said he's involved in the church right now?
Yeah.
My first caution would be, because it's a standard problem, is that he be very, very careful about working with young children.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real common problem, even for the person who has given their heart to the Lord now, to walk away from such potent power as sexual drive.
Mm-hmm.
And, let's face it, sex is an incredible thing, and it's very powerful.
What are you doing through Operation Lookout to help the families of missing children? And to help prevent it.
Pardon?
And to help prevent it.
Well, we are working in the prevention field, but primarily what we do is we work with the parents that have already had an abducted child, whether it's custodial interference, a runaway, or a stranger abducted child. And we work with them because they're usually frantic and traumatized, and they don't know where to go next. And they are finding that when they go to the police can't really do a whole lot for them. And so we take them from step one to step, whatever step we need to take them to. We spend as much time with them as possible, getting them through the trauma, the initial trauma and the long-term trauma.
How many more Noreen Goshes are there out there? How many more parents like that have that bedroom, the teddy bear in the corner, the bed made, waiting for the child to come home and going through the agony?
Bob, I don't know. In some instances you'll hear millions, others you'll hear thousands, sometimes hundreds. We have a motto that we have selected as a result of the statistics question, and that is one missing child is one child too many.
What's the worst? Excuse me, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and our next question is, isn't one enough? There are an awful lot of parents. When you take the one parent who's traumatized, multiply them by the spouse, and then you go into the brothers, the sisters, the aunts, the uncles, the extended family, the grandmas, the grandpas, that is multiplied over and over. And when you hear that on the milk carton campaign across the nation only 6 children were found, that makes me sick, because that is not only 6 successful finds that would not have been, but that is multiplied time and time again. Happier than ever family.
Why hasn't America given more attention to the problem of missing children? Is it part of our disposable throwaway society? Is it the dehumanized aspect of what has happened in our culture? Is it an anti-child philosophy? What is it? I mean, people are more worried about stolen stereos than they are kids.
Well, it takes about 10 years for a community to take hold and to develop a mindset that says this is a part of our culture and we need to respond to it. The government, unfortunately, we lean on the government for a lot, and if the government doesn't make it a priority, the media doesn't, the people don't. Now, people who go through the trauma or have had it on their block, they will begin to, because it touches your heart and you can't bypass what you feel. But we've got a real problem with people paying attention to the issue. There's a lot of denial going on. It's very hard to think in terms, this could be my child. But, every Christian, every individual I know, when they send their child out the door, they immediately face the possibility that my child is up for grabs.
Is the church doing enough? Is the Christian community addressing this social issue?
No.
Why not?
Denial. There is a philosophy, there is a feeling that the angels of God are watching over that child. Oh, I'm sorry, that might be true, but if it were exclusively true and we were exclusive of trauma, we would never have a car accident, we'd never have an abducted child, we would never have a divorce, we would never have sin or pain hurt our life. So let's get back, to the real world here, folks. That, the government knows how many salmon go upstream. Isn't that interesting?
Very
they also
interesting.
know how many trucks have been stolen. Now, the clearinghouses in many states have started to count the children. In 1988, there will be a complete count as to what child fits in what category as to why they're missing. Well, excuse me, but I'm not going to wait till 1988 to help these parents.
Well, Melody, I sense a certain militancy in your voice, and I don't blame you a bit for having it. It's a terrible tragedy. It's not being adequately addressed. Now, if you'd like to get in touch with Operation Lookout in Seattle, Washington, and know more about this, you've had a child abducted, you can contact us at Box 36A, Denver 80236. There are other resources, such as the Adam Walsh Child Resource Center in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Child Find also has several numbers out of New York State, and we'd be happy to pass this information on to you. If you suspect your child is missing, Experts say call your local police department, call your state police, call the sheriff's office, call the FBI, call your local missing children network, and call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And that number is 1-800-843-5678. That's 1-800-843-5678. Go ahead, Jack.
Actually, it's going to sound like a cliche, but I was flipping across the dial today. I heard you talking about missing children, and I thought I'd relay my story about my brother, my younger brother. 2 years ago, he went out on this paper route and never returned. We had reason to believe that maybe he was a runaway. We were having trouble with him in school, and he was doing drugs and listening to punk rock and, hanging out with the wrong sort of people. And there's been leads from the police, but, they've come up false, and we've never seen him since.
How old was he at the time?
He was 14.
14.
Yes.
How have your parents handled this?
Pardon me?
Excuse me.
He was into cocaine and marijuana, pills, and, a few times he'd had run-ins and gone to juvenile hall a couple times.
Your parents, how have they handled his being gone?
Well, I don't know. The relationship had kind of gone downhill. There was always a situation where, where they didn't know what was happening with the son, with my brother.
And what's being done to try and locate him?
Well, we've gotten in touch with the sheriffs, and they don't know. It seems like we've just been get the runaround from people like that.
Do you feel frustrated by the authorities?
Sometimes, yeah, I get angry once in a while. Just kind of blow up.
The parents of little Johnny Gosh say they've endured a living hell not knowing what happened to their child. There are instances when they think Johnny is called in the middle of the night pleading for help, but then they wonder if it was just a prank. The father of Adam Walsh, whose abduction and murder became a twice-aired television special called Adam Admits, I still carry his picture around. The time I had with him was the best of my life. How can we assure that Adam and Johnny's fate doesn't happen to others? First, their pictures must be displayed everywhere. The Center for Missing and Exploited Children directly attributes recovery of 89 youngsters to public awareness after seeing their pictures in milk cartons and grocery bags. Secondly, we must rid America of the porno plague. Police vice squads report that 77% of molesters of boys and 87% of molesters of girls admitted to initiating and imitating sexual behavior they had seen in pornographic magazines. The problem of missing children is in part a problem of pornography. The Hugh Hefters and Larry Flints may feign concern for the problem of missing children, but their product panders perversion, prodding imbalanced minds to kidnap, assault, and murder children because of lustful compulsions. It's time to get Playboy, Penthouse, Hustler, and hardcore porn out of the stores so our children can remain in our homes.
This is the end of Side 1. Please turn the cassette over at this point for the continuation of the message on Side 2.
A high percentage of missing children are runaways, some experts say, most of whom who return home within 72 hours. Others were taken by parents involved in custody battles. The smallest percentage, and the most tragic, demands our immediate attention. Those taken by strangers. Pornography is a major problem. In 1982, the U.S. Customs Service reported that 70% of confiscated illegal pornography was child pornography, a prime factor behind child abductions. In addition, the FBI reports that 1 of every 3 American girls will be sexually assaulted before the age of 12, and many of them run away and join the ranks of missing children. I'm sad to say that the tragedy, missing children, has been exploited. Several for-profit missing children publications are currently under investigation for falsely soliciting donations. Others charge for services such as fingerprinting and photograph distribution. These are things, services that law enforcement agencies will do for gratis, for free. Above all, prevention is the most important step any parent can take. If you shop with your kids, don't send them to one department while you go to another. Inform your child what to do if separated from you. Keep a record of your child's fingerprints. Don't let your child wander the streets without adult supervision. And teach your child that not all adults are good, and avoid strangers. I want to repeat some instructions I gave just a little while ago. If your child is missing, first of all, call your local police department, but don't stop there. Call the state police department. Call the sheriff's department. Contact the FBI. Call your local missing children's network. And then, of course, you can call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There is an 800 number for that. Also, the Adam Walsh Child Resource Center and Child Fine are two organizations that can assist you in this regard. The numbers appear in the back of semi-trucks, milk cartons, and in television announcements. No one knows how many there are, but an estimated 50,000 join their ranks each year. They are missing children, abducted, exploited, sometimes murdered. When they're found, sometimes they end up like the one whose tombstone simply says, Princess Doe. No one knows her real name, her place of birth, or who her parents might have been. She's the first entry in the FBI's National Computer of Unidentified Persons. Law enforcement officials only know that a startled cemetery caretaker discovered her remains. The police chief who investigated the case says she was mutilated and thrown away like a piece of garbage. Arguments abound as to whether the number of missing children is inflated or underreported. Experts agree that a child is most vulnerable walking alone down a street. 43% are abducted that way. Fears about missing children has spawned a growth industry in child tracking and identification products, including everything from videotapes to toothprints. Electronic homing devices warn parents with warbling siren sounds when their child leaves a prescribed territory. For $2,500, parents can obtain computer-generated photos made of their children as they would look several years later. These efforts are sometimes successful. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children credits pictures in grocery bags and milk cartons with finding 3,168 missing children in 1985. In response to critics who say such efforts create hysteria, John Walsh, whose son Adam was abducted and murdered, says, if you can put yourself in the horrible situation of having a missing child, you want that picture everywhere. There's no fear communicated by pictures of missing children, only hope. The mother of little Johnny Gosh. Noreen, have you done anything by means of these computer-enhanced photographs?
We're having it done right now. Johnny will be 18 on his next birthday, so the time has come where he would probably have made some drastic facial changes as well as growth overall. And what they do, they've requested a picture of my husband since Johnny favors him more in looks. And then somehow or some way they will come out with what Johnny may look like. It's our only hope at this point because he has changed, no doubt, if he is still alive.
What about all these child tracking devices? Videotapes, toothprints, little sirens that go off if the kid walks out of an area. Is this just kind of a growth industry that's grown up around this type of thing? Do you think it's a good thing? Would you recommend parents to do it? Would you use some of these products if you had it to do over again?
I probably would not use the electronic devices because I think that's, in some ways, an opportunist way of preying upon the situation. In terms of identification records, if that child would ever be an unidentified body, there is need for that to determine the name of children that are found many times. And so I think that the microchips on the teeth probably serve a purpose. But overall, in the longevity of an electronic device implanted on a child, I think that's just going to breed paranoia.
Americans are very fattish. Even now, there's some indication they're growing a little tired of seeing faces in grocery bags and on milk cartons. Are you fearful that because of the way that cultural trends move in this country, there might come a time when people don't have this type of concern and the faces from the milk cartons and the trucks and the bags would vanish?
Oh, of course, that's a possibility. But you see, when Johnny was kidnapped, there wasn't that concern in the country at that time. We had to start it. Us, John and Reve Walsh, and a few other parents whose children were missing at that point in time. There was not national publicity given to these children. So prior to that, there was nothing to compare it to. And I see this as a wave. Yes, other things will take precedent in the news, which will leave the parents with their quest alone.
Do you have any idea where Johnny might be? Has there been any kind of contact? I commented earlier, it was reported in the press you had received some calls in the middle of the night.
We are fairly confident now that Johnny has been taken out of the country. And we now, at this point in the investigation, do know the names of one of the participants in the kidnapping.
Really?
And we are unable to move forward with an arrest at this point. We are waiting because there's more evidence that we need to gather. And this is in complete conjunction with the law enforcement.
Are you at liberty to say why he was taken?
He was taken for the organized profit that the people do when they use children for pornography, prostitution. There's an entire network that develops from this, and certain children are targeted.
How has this affected your relationship with your husband, with family members, and with others? I've read instances where it sometimes tears a home apart just because the stress that's created. Has it drawn you and your other family members closer together, or has it been difficult?
Well, needless to say, it's been difficult, but we receive phone calls from the Missing Children Center in Washington periodically, and they tell us that my husband and I are one of the few couples in the United States that are still married after having a child kidnapped and still missing. There's just a handful that are still married. So the divorce rate is very high. Suicides are very high. And I think the one thing that we have identified with mentally to keep us sound and help us is that Johnny was the true victim. We have never one time fallen down and said, "Why me, Lord?" We've never done that because it was our little boy who is the victim. And all efforts, concern, love, all that goes with being a parent in this situation is directed upon him and his welfare. And when you do that, you don't have time for a pity party. And I was just going to say, I think that that's part of why we've remained emotionally maybe a little bit more stable than some of the parents that, we've talked with that have encountered problems.
The guilt. If only we would have been with Johnny that day. How do you deal with that? Surely there must have been a stage you went through where you blamed yourself?
Oh, definitely, definitely. You feel that way. You also feel guilty if you eat any food because your child may not have any. There's a whole series of things that happens to parents. And I think knowing about the grief stages that you go through in this trauma can help because you realize that it's normal. I co-authored a booklet here in Iowa on the stages of grief that you do go through because other parents will go through this in the future. We're not the first and the last couple to have this happen. And I think as much information that can be gathered as possible is good. We've also participated in studies by several universities where they have used our case versus others in terms of how we have handled it to still be able to retain our family unit and our marriage. And they have sent this on to the Missing Children Center in Washington, and they have developed a booklet on grief and some type of follow-up so that maybe there can be an intervention program so more families are not split up.
Well, of course, our prayer is that Johnny will be returned, and presuming that he is, what will your lives be like with him walking back in? You've missed a whole part of his adolescence, a major portion, a huge percentage of his developmental process. Have you thought about how you would deal with that?
We've thought about it, but until we have a set of circumstances to deal with, no one can predict how you would handle it because it's going to call for extreme measures at the time. And we will just have to do the very best we can with the assistance that's available for him. And that will be the top priority. The one thing I do know that is until the men are apprehended and dealt with, Johnny's life is not safe, even if he would be recovered, because he may be able to identify them.
I gave some steps a moment ago of what people should do. Anything I've left out other than contacting the local law enforcement authorities, Missing Children Network, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children? Anything else a parent should do?
The only thing I would add to that is that the parents should keep in mind that even after they contact all these agencies, they must remain very active in the case in terms of helping to do missing persons posters, distribute them. Keep an active hand on all parts of the investigation because it is your child. And no one will look for that child in the same way that the parent will because it's your baby. And you have that right to ask questions. Now, what is being done? What can we do in this area? Anything and everything that's possible to do, the parent should be aware of it.
Noreen, what can I encourage this vast audience to do to help to focus attention on this problem? Anything, any missing links? What aren't we doing?
The public that has not had this tragedy happen to them to consider what it might be if one of their loved ones were taken and stand with those of us who have had the tragedy. Back us. realize that when there's publicity campaigns to downgrade the importance of missing children, that in a sense is the evil overtaking our world again, because these children are innocent little lambs, and this is a tragedy above and beyond what most families would ever think they'd have to go through. And strength, prayers, a good word, backing, write letters, like in terms of this movie, Raising Arizona. Mm-hmm. Speak out when you see something that ridicules this issue, because you never know when it could be someone you might love. It could happen.
Noreen, our prayers are with you. The prayers of America's largest live prayer family are extended your way. We want to see Johnny come back soon. Jim in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Jim, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Bob.
Yeah.
I had talked to you about a year and a half ago when I called from Leesburg State Prison in New Jersey.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
Yeah. Okay. Two things I wanted to touch on. First of all, I noted your reaction to Bubba and his involvement with the Little Brother program.
Yes.
And I just wanted to comment, if you remember my situation, it dealt with an incestuous relationship, and I had a lot of fears about what it had done to the boy. Mm-hmm. And I have had the experience, since I have been out, of being able to talk to and share with guys who were molested as children and had kept it inside for years, in one case 12, another case 14 years, and to be able to help them get through it. And it's been a part of my paying back, and it's to me it's been a valuable experience.
Well, how do you respond to the parents who say, "Wait a minute, don't ever let this guy get near a kid again"?
Well, I just have to let them learn to trust me.
Do you feel it's part of the road to recovery? Do you think this is something that you have to learn to be able to trust yourself?
Exactly.
Would you resent the fact if the public doesn't trust you?
No, I don't, because I can see where they're coming from. I can understand their fears. And,
You were involved in child molestation.
What?
You were involved in child molestation.
Right. We had a boy that was living with us, and I was involved with him for about a year.
Some would say there's no hope. Once that way, always that way. Never let them get around a kid again.
With the Lord, there's always hope. And that is the only way that a person who has gotten into something like that can ever hope to get out of it.
Do you consider yourself as the alcoholic who says, I may not drink, I may abstain, but once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic?
I think there's something to be said for that, but at the same time, I also think that there is a complete cleansing that occurs with the action of the Lord.
And you feel that's happened in your life?
Yes. Yes, definitely. In being restored to my family and back again with 6 children in the house, there have been no problems there. There have been no problems with... Once in a rare while, if there has been a real stressful kind of situation, something like that. But I've learned to head that off and to recognize those signs way before it gets to a point of being beyond control.
Jim, we wish you well, and our prayers are with you. Laura, Dallas, Texas.
I had a daughter who was abducted a year and a half ago, and I had always been aware of the issue and had always been concerned, and of course very concerned for my own children. I was one of those that never believed it would happen to me. But I was always sensitive to it, not as much, of course, as I am now. But thank God there's a lot of wonderful people who are sensitive to it, who have not been touched by this, that have helped us out.
Now, where's your daughter?
She's still gone.
Still gone? How old was she?
She was 9 at the age of her abduction.
What about the stress in your home that Mrs. Gosh talked about a moment ago?
Well, it's definitely there now. I was single when she disappeared and still am, but I do have a son who is 6. And it's caused some problems with him. He's having a hard time dealing with that.
Is he fearful?
Yes, he is. And then he is and he isn't. The way children react is really very different from the way adults react.
Have you had a tendency to be overly protective?
Oh, yes. Most definitely. That's very hard not to be overprotective and be too paranoid and try to let him lead as normal of a life as possible. That's an extremely difficult thing to do.
What kind of thoughts go through your mind about what could be happening to your daughter and where she is? I mean, surely there must be some horrible things. How do you deal with that?
Well, I try to be very positive in all my efforts. I've always been very much involved in Christy's case and in the search efforts for her. And I try not to deal on the negative aspects of it. I'm very well aware of what she possibly could be going through and what may be happening to her. But I can't dwell on it. Everything has to be positive. I just have to keep looking for her. I keep in constant contact with the law enforcement agencies and just go from there.
How was she abducted, Laura?
She was about half a block from home, and it was in broad daylight. She was walking home from a little girlfriend's house, and a neighbor had seen her getting ready to cross the street to come on into the apartment complex where we lived, and that was the last time she was seen. She never made it into the complex.
What would you change if you could do it over again?
I guess the only thing is that for her not to be by herself, to use the buddy system, for a child never to be anywhere by themselves.
Laura, our hearts go out to you. I want you to know that. And my prayer is that your daughter will be found. Montreal, Quebec. Chris, what's on your mind? Way at the other end of the country in Canada.
Hi.
Yeah, Chris.
Okay, my son was adopted, you say?
Abducted, yeah.
Yeah, by his father.
By the father?
Yeah.
This is your son. How old was your son?
He was 4 years old.
You were separated?
Yes, I was divorced, and everything was going well. And then I was working for a company and just putting ads, in the paper. And I just signed Chris, and somehow, I don't know how it happened, somebody who knew my husband told me that he was about to leave the country.
Did you know your daughter was with your husband?
No, my son lived with me, but by some miracle, I don't know how, somebody just by reading Chris in the paper, called me and said that my ex-husband was about to leave the country. So then I took precaution, and I went to the school, and I say, if his father comes, he's not allowed to leave with his father without my permission and everything. And then later on, I talked to his father because he was visiting my son every second week. And I confronted him with that, and I said, is it true you're about to leave the country? And do you intend to take Jan with you? And then he says, no, why should I do that? And he would hate me for the rest of his life. But he's still, on one of the visiting weekends, a few months later, he took him away because on the Monday morning, my son wasn't back, and I just had a letter bring by the postman, and he said, well, with your authorization, I'm taking Jan to California, and then he sent a copy to his lawyer, and that's all that was in it. So I knew that my son was going to California, and that's it. I didn't know where he was. I just knew his father took him. So I went to a lawyer, to legal aid, and then the lawyer there says, well, there's nothing we can do about that, and you're young, and why should you worry about that? You can have other children. In case like that, we can't find them. And so then I said, well, should I go to the police? And he says, well, would the father hurt your child? And I said, no, I don't think so. And he says, well, the police cannot help you. You'd be wasting your time. But still I went, and then the police started some kind of research because they knew it was in California, but they didn't know where.
Chris, the thing that amazes me about your story is the reaction to the authorities. I mean, you're young, you can have another child. That's hard to believe. Melody Gibson works with an organization called Operation Lookout up in the Seattle, Washington area. They're involved in helping people in this whole syndrome of missing children. Melody, I guess we've alluded briefly to some of the reasons why it happens, but what, other than the custodial cases like with Chris, why do they do it?
Well, there's too many reasons, Bob.
But what motivates them?
Are you talking about custodial or stranger abduction?
Stranger abduction.
Well, pedophiles seem to be a real problem, and I think pornography plays a real big role in it. Who knows where it starts, whether it's as a child because they were molested themselves or because they've taken to the strong stimulus of pornographic pictures of children. I don't know. But I do know that there's a real problem in this area, and that pedophiles will commonly become computerized or very organized. They'll swap the pictures of children. They're your and my children. They're not somebody else's. They're just America's next most precious resource.
Well, where do they get the pictures of these kids?
Well, often it'll be a fraudulent thing like, oh, you're such an adorable kid, let me take a picture. One of the things that happens is they're known for getting to know children really well. They adore children. Not all of them hate children, want to hurt children, but they often absolutely adore children. They have somehow stopped emotionally at a level where they rather play with a kid than be in the company of an adult. Unfortunately, they're sexually stimulated also. Not always is a sexual stimulant, but often they just want the grown-up and the immature relationship combined all in one, and I don't think they always realize it's a hidden agenda. However, they will take a picture of a child in a park. They'll talk the kid into coming home. They'll get to know a kid over 2 or 3 weeks. You got to remember, kids, unless they have a natural built-in fear, and they don't all, will get to know someone over a few days and realize it's a pretty nice little person here.
Even if you're telling the child, don't talk to strangers.
Well, is it a stranger after they've talked several times? You see, are all kids on guard? No. That's the unfortunate part. We have taught our children to respect our elders.
Yeah.
Don't talk back. Don't disagree. I heard of a case, I don't know if it was true or not, but I heard of a case where in the mall, a security guard officer had said to the young person, come with me, I saw you take that. Well, I have told my daughter, and she's 14 now, my youngest one, I said, if some security guard looks right and says all the right things, say, 1 minute, I've got to go tell the clerk so they can tell my mother that I'm going with you. Well, right away the clerk says, wait a minute, that's not our guard.
Well, you're telling me that these people would go so far as to dress as a security guard in a mall?
Oh, sure, Bob. They can get badges and the whole bit for $4. I mean, they can get the uniform, you name it.
Anything to abduct a child?
Oh, yeah. Well, see, you got to remember, some abductions are 40 minutes long and then the kid's returned. Now, the police don't always, depends on the attitude of the police jurisdiction, but they don't always call that an abduction.
Well, what happens in the 40 minutes?
Take a wild guess.
They molest the child. They sexually abuse the child.
It can be molestation or getting to know him. Huh? What? Pardon?
They may take pictures and sexually molest the child, and the police don't consider that a kidnapping?
Not always. Not if the child is quickly returned. It, again, depends on how many cases they're dealing with, whether or not the right department's been involved, whether or not the detective on duty went home and someone else took it. It really does depend on an attitude. And I'll tell you, one of the best things that has come up in the missing children issue is the grassroots fervor about let's do something about this because it could be my child the next time.
Cliff, Billings, Montana.
I've been listening to your show here, and a man by the name of Bubba called.
Yes, right. The fellow who had abducted a child and physically abused a child. For the people who didn't hear the call, spent 18 months in prison for it, and now says he's out and wants to make amends, feels he's paid his debt to society.
My son, 12 years old, was abducted for 3 days. He told his mother and myself that the man that abducted him referred to himself as Bubba Winston. The man who abducted my son, he served 18 months in Deer Lodge Prison. My son was 12 years old at the time. He was delivering a paper route in the neighborhood here in Billings. They went up to a place called Red Lodge Mountain.
My staff tells me that as incredible as it sounds, it is the guy.
I want that man. I cannot believe that they have let him out of prison. He abused my son while he was there in the mountains, and I want him.
What did he do?
He physically abused him. He broke his jawbone, and I am just furious that they have let him out of prison.
He feels as though he's paid his debt to society. And
that's what I heard him saying.
And that he feels that God has done something in his life that has changed him, and that this was an irrational action, and that he's trying to make amends now.
I don't believe that.
If it were true, if God has done something to change his heart, would you think that God might allow you to forgive him?
I don't think I could ever forgive him for what he did, no. And I promised John, if I ever got that man, he'd be taken care of.
There is an opportunity here, in spite of the horrible thing that's taken place, for some healing and forgiveness, because God is able to do some things in your heart. Don't underestimate it, Cliff. I understand where you're coming from. I know your anger. I know your horror. But just have some faith, Cliff, okay? Children missing from our homes are in imminent danger of physical and sexual abuse, whether in the company of a child molester or a non-custodial parent who has kidnapped them. Until that child is returned, everything must be done to help grieving parents cope with the trauma of not knowing if their child is dead or alive. Children are a silent, helpless majority. They have no power, no vote, no money to defend them. You and I are their only voice. We must provide for their safety and do everything possible to return them after exploitation by an evil individual. Stolen stereos are tracked. Why not our children? They're a far more valuable resource. It's time to make child abduction a quickly enforced capital crime, except in cases of marital disputes. We must condemn movies like Raising Arizona and stop the porno plague, since many children are abducted for pornographic purposes. Perhaps most importantly, keep your eyes open for those pictures of missing children. People find people. Don't pass lightly over that milk carton photograph. Look twice, think twice, and pray much for that child and his parents to be reunited in the arms of love.
This is the end of the message. For further information regarding other topics available on cassette and in printed form, write Bob Larson Ministries, Box 36A, Denver, Colorado, 80236.